In this video, I want to show you how to make your assessments in Angel more secure. Under the test link in Lessons, click the Settings hyperlink, and you can configure these secure settings while you're creating your test. You start in the Access tab. Under Internet Security, you have 3 choices: None, Medium, and High. You cannot use high security here because it requires that an Angel browser be installed on every computer to which students at Chattahoochee Tech have access, and that can't be done, so you cannot make this choice. You can choose Medium or None. If you choose Medium, that provides a minimal amount of security. It by no means makes your test secure. It's just the first step in many steps it will take to make this test as secure as possible. When you're finished in the Access tab, move to the Interaction tab, which is where you're going to make the bulk of your security settings for this test. First of all, under Delivery Settings, set a deadline by putting a check mark next to Stop Accepting Submissions. Let's make our date match the date we have in this subtitle. Month, November, date, the 8th, and our time is 11 p.m. Next, under Display Settings, you don't want to display your test all at once. Why? Because that encourages students to print it and give it to students who haven't yet taken the test. Your most secure setting is question at a time. That means if they try to print the test, each question will print on a separate page, and they're far less likely to print 25 or 30 pages than they are to print 1 or 2 pages. Under Question Set Defaults, you have several options here that can make your test more secure. The first thing you can do is select Randomize the order in which questions are delivered. That means if students are communicating, they can't say, how are you going to answer this first question? Because one student's first question is going to be different from another student's first question. Next, you can randomize the order in which answers are displayed if you're using multiple choice questions. Always select Don't Allow Backtrack if you're delivering the test one question at a time. That way, after students see a question and answer it, they can't go back and change that answer. Under Submission Settings, it's best to allow only one attempt, but if that doesn't work for you and you allow multiple attempts, be aware that, of course, on second and subsequent attempts, students have the opportunity to look up answers and use those answers in those attempts. You don't want to show the Save button, especially if you're timing this test under Time Settings. Showing the Save button allows students to save the test and resume it later. And some students may do this not realizing that their time keeps ticking while they're saving the test and looking up answers. So deselect Show the Save button unless you're going to give them an unlimited amount of time to take the test. I don't recommend giving them an unlimited amount of time to take the test for obvious reasons. It gives them plenty of opportunity to look up answers. Select Limit Time to, and then put the number of minutes you want to give them to take this test. Make it reasonable, but not enough time that they can look up answers. Now they can't save this test. They have to take it once they open it, and they have only 40 minutes to take this test. If you also put a check mark here next to Automatically Submit, this test will submit to you for grading as soon as those 40 minutes are up, whether or not the student is finished with the test. In other words, students cannot take longer than these 40 minutes to take the test. All of these things together provide the most secure test that you can provide in the Angel environment. When you're finished with the Interaction tab, scroll up, and last, go to the Review tab. In an online class, you may want to give your students an online review. However, the most secure setting in the Review tab is to disable the review and allow them a review in some other way, for instance, via a collaborate session or via a phone call. If you allow a review, you have to select Full Review or List Only, and I suggest a full review because that shows them right and wrong answers and all of your feedback. You have to control this full review, though, by putting check marks next to Review Begins. and review ends. Next to review begins, you tell Angel how many days after a particular event you want the review to begin. This drop-down menu lists those events. Do you want to start the review X number of days after user submission? I don't recommend this. There's no security in this particular setting. That means that students can see a full review of this test X number of days after the student submits the test, and he can then share that review with students who have not submitted the test. I would not use user submission. I would choose either assessment disabled or specific date. If you choose assessment disabled, tell Angel how many days after the assessment is disabled you want this review to begin. Let's say you want it to begin 2 days after the assessment is disabled. That means that students will be able to see your review 2 days after your deadline passes. You configured that date in the Interaction tab by putting a check mark next to Stop Accepting Submissions. This way, the review begins after all students have taken the test. Then you have to tell Angel how long you want this review to last, and I would keep it short by putting a 1 in this block. In other words, you want this review to end 24 hours after it begins. Why do you want a short review period? Again, to discourage students from printing this review and your answer key and sharing it with students who haven't yet taken your class. You may want to use this test again in future semesters. Under feedback options, a lot of instructors deselect answer key, believing that will add security to the test by not allowing students to print an answer key. The problem with this is if you're using questions like multiple choice, students will not be able to see the correct answers unless you provide an answer key. The key is to keep the review period short. When you're finished with these 3 tabs, save your settings, and you now have a test that's as secure as you can make it in the Angel environment.